And we're going to give everybody a little bit of time to get into the space.
Take their seats.
Exactly. And if this will work with me, we're going to be going live on Facebook as well.
Oh, cool.
All right. Hello, everybody. I see participants kind of shuffling in. Welcome. We're going to give everybody just a couple more minutes to come in and get into the space for our event today. We'll give it just another minute. Okay. Hello, everybody. Happy Friday. We're very excited to be hosting this next Bookmarked for Book Clubs event and are so happy that you can join us. I am Kirsten and I work in marketing with Sourcebooks Landmark. And again, we're thrilled that you could join us today for a Q&A with authors Jenny Milchman and S.F. Kosa. Before we introduce the authors and really kick off the event today, I want to make sure that the audience is aware that we have a zero tolerance policy for harassment and intimidation of either of our authors. We will be moderating the chat and we will remove attendees if they engage in vulgar, obscene, or abusive language towards our authors. However, feel free to use the chat to introduce yourself, talk to other readers, and chime in with your thoughts on the discussion. You can also begin asking questions immediately in the Q&A bar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Please do put any questions for the authors in the Q&A bar and not the chat so it makes it easier for us to moderate. And without further ado, let me introduce our authors. Jenny Milchman is the USA Today bestselling and Mary Higgins Clark award-winning author of 5 psychological thrillers, including The Second Mother. She is a member of the Sisters in Crime Speakers Bureau and the founder and organizer of Take Your Child to a Bookstore Day, which is celebrated annually in all 50 states. She lives in the Hudson River Valley with her family. And then writing under the pseudonym of S.F. Kosa, Sarah Fine is a longtime clinical psychologist and a writer by passion. Sarah has published more than 20 books, including young adult and romance. The Quiet Girl is her debut psychological thriller. She was born on the West Coast, raised in the Midwest, and is now firmly entrenched on the East Coast. Welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
All right. Really excited to be here talking with you guys today. October is the perfect time to talk about mysteries and thrillers, so let's go ahead and dive in. I'd love for each of you to give us an elevator pitch of your latest book. So Jenny, do you want to kick it off for us?
Sure. So The Second Mother is about a woman who has nothing to lose because she's lost everything. And Julie Weathers leaves everything behind, throws drapes over the furniture, packs up her house, takes only her rescue dog Depot, and she moves to a tiny little island off the coast of Maine to become a teacher in a one-room schoolhouse. There she finds one very troubled student.
Okay, sounds intriguing. And SF?
All right. So The Quiet Girl is about Alex, whose wife, Mina, their newlyweds, disappears after their first big fight. And his search for her leads him to the realization that he may not have known her very well at all. and that she's left all the clues for how to find her in the last place he'd think to look.
Again, intriguing. Both are fabulous books and very, very fantastic reads. So tell us a bit about the research that you had to do for each of these books.
You want me to go? I mean,
Sure, Jen.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna, I mean, mine will be short because I was just gonna say that the thing about me as an author is I really, really don't like research. I'm not good at it. My secret weapon in the research toolkit is my 14-year-old son, who has like an eagle eye, and so he points me to what I need to do. For the second mother, the research that really kind of weighed me down, and hopefully doesn't come across that way in the book, was about the lobster fishing industry, because it takes place on this tiny coastal island. And what I didn't realize is how complex, I mean, you know, the stuff we pull out and dip into butter, some of us, it has to do with climate change and global warming and big agribusiness, except it's big seafood business. And, you know, I did sort of a deep dive into lobster. That's what I'd say.
Nice.
Yeah. So I, for The Quiet Girl, it's, as all psychological suspense books are, very psychological. As a psychologist myself, I knew the importance of doing that research pretty well. So I consulted with some colleagues and had them vet the book. I consulted with a physician friend of mine about some of the stuff in the book, and this is my first contemporary book. Usually I've been writing fantasy or sci-fi or books that aren't set in our very, very real world. And so for this book, I decided I was going to actually do that kind of research. And so I interviewed Provincetown's only police detective, Detective Meredith Lober, who gave me some real insight into this place I was writing about and had, you know, visited many times, but the sort of notion of policing it is a completely different perspective. So I spent an afternoon with her driving me around. It actually informed my plot at a certain point. So that was actually really neat, and something I hadn't done as a fantasy author was to like research this actual place and with a person who, you know, works in that place.
Oh,
I'm totally jealous of authors who do that, because that's like being a real author to me. Like, I remember Chris Bojalian describing for one of his books that he had to kind of get the feel of a plane crash. So he did this thing where he goes into like a canister in a swimming pool and you have to get out. And I was like, oh my gosh, in addition to that being terrifying, like,
Yeah,
you're a real author, and you know, I just make it up.
well, Jodi Picoult especially is like unbelievably good at that as an author. Like she just, like the depth in her books is incredible. And I couldn't ever even approximate that, but it was, I dipped my toe in for this.
Yeah, next time you'll go swimming. No, I think you're on your way. It's very it's very admirable.
Well, and the atmosphere in both of the books is just incredible. And like, you know, as I was reading them, just I was there, I was with the characters, and it's chilling, honestly. So kind of touching on the research again, across your whole writing career, what's been the most shocking or surprising thing you've learned while researching? Jenny, this might be a little difficult just because of your style, but
Can't SF go first? I'm good. I know you sent us these questions, and even when you sent it, I was kind of like, I don't know. You go SF, and maybe I'll make something up while we're thinking.
Yes, I know. I don't have anything super. I mean, I've found out a lot of facts that I just didn't know from doing research, like how the temperature changes as you descend underground. It actually gets hotter instead of colder. And you don't have to go very far. So I did research about mines. I've done research about all the various ways that you can kill somebody. But for this book, I have to say that I mentioned that the thing that surprised me was actually the way that the research I was doing and this interview, you know, I was interviewing this detective, actually changed my plot. And I didn't, in a way I didn't expect, but that actually just caused a number of things to click into place. And that was really cool. And I didn't expect it because I do, decide the way I want things to go for my books, and I have them plotted out. And so when it changed, I was like, whoa, I didn't know that could happen.
It gets so unruly. Okay, I think mine is this then. It'll be for my last novel, my fourth novel, which Sourcebooks Landmark also published. It's called Wicked River. And it's about a couple that goes on a backcountry honeymoon. And I think the thing that most surprised me while I was researching it was just how incredible. I sort of knew this from like camping once or twice, but how dangerous it is to drink water in the woods, that even if you are dying of thirst, it can be more, SF, you seem like you're an outdoors woman. It can be more dangerous to drink the water than to die of thirst. And we only have like 48 hours that we can go without water without being in really, really bad straits. And still you may not want to lap from that beautiful silvery trickling stream because it could just.
Yeah.
Definitely. I'm
many portable filters.
Yes, portable water filters are great.
But their honeymoon goes awry. Those filters, I didn't know about the filters, but they're no more.
Those are terrifying when you like think you have everything set up. I love those book premises where you think like everything is set up and then you realize how vulnerable you are all of a sudden. Like one thing goes wrong and you just
the before and after. Yeah.
Definitely. And kind of tailing on that, have any of your characters ever surprised you as you were writing the stories?
I think my characters often surprise me. I find that, like I said, I mean, this is jumping ahead, but I do, sort of plot my books, and I tend to be less character driven than plot driven when I start. But as I write, my characters usually, as I get to know them and really start writing them and delving in, they often, like, I'm like, oh, this thing I planned for them to do or say, they just can't. And so what they would actually do is, something completely different. I can't think of a specific example because it happens on the regular, so.
Yeah, I think like all of my heroines do the same thing in a way, which is that they go from being flawed and weak in some way to the events of the story, putting them in a position where if these terrible things hadn't happened to them, I think they never would have become the fully actualized, strong women they needed to be. So that part doesn't surprise me. That arc feels very consistent. And a bookseller once told me that when she's reading one of my books, she feels stronger as a person herself. And I love that because that's how I feel when I'm writing them. So that part is sort of like the like dessert that I know I'm going to come back and get at the table each time I sit down to write. But different artifacts of them really surprised me. And just since I know we both have new books out, in The Second Mother, I didn't even know that Julie struggled with alcohol dependency until I got to that point in the book. Like, all my living with her, and I lived with her for probably 1 or 2 years in my head, I didn't know she had a problem with alcohol until her husband poured her that drink.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I never would have thought of it that way, but that's really cool to hear. So then, are you a pantser or a plotter?
Do you want to start this time?
So I guess SF and I will be, opposite in this because I am very much, I do not know what is going to happen until the events of the plot are unraveling in my direction or in some direction. And often they go in a way that, even though I know the general arc of the story, I could not have imagined, following it down this route or that route. So I would call myself very much a pantser. And the price that I have to pay for that is some of my books go through as many, I think my first book went through as many as like 22 drafts.
Wow.
You really have to be like devoted. My first novel did as well, but you have to love these characters to be willing to go through all of that with them. So I think that's like, by the time you've gotten through that many, you really know, like you have something if they've survived that long. I am definitely more structured, like in terms of my thought process. I tend to think, and I haven't always, but I've sort of, I think, grown in this direction as I've churned out my books in a way that it sort of appeals to the way I think. I tend to think in terms of my structure, and I want to sort of have, so I lay down, when I'm plotting, I lay down some like sort of marks for myself, like my midpoint, my sort of dark night of the soul. So I think about my twists. So I definitely think about those things, and I start to write like an outline. But like Jenny, you were saying, I tend to realize as I write that either this is going to go in a different direction or more stuff is going to happen, or, so it definitely evolves. So I would say that I'm a plotter for sure, but you have to be flexible, because if you try to like ram something through that you just think has to happen in a certain way, it's going to feel contrived or rushed, or like the hand of the author is just kind of reaching in and fiddling around with stuff, and you want something to feel organic and natural, like it is unfurling. So you have to be flexible about that stuff, or else, I mean, I'm not good enough to like think about everything ahead of time. You have to kind of follow where something leads when it's clear that it needs to go in a different direction.
Do you write an actual outline? Like, do you have a document that you're working with when you, yeah?
I do, because I like to sort of know, and then as I'm writing, I will write like notes for my next 3 chapters. Just, and I'll usually realize something's going to take longer than, I think it's going to, or it needs to happen now. And then I need to, since it's happening earlier, I need to sort of think about what would happen, in a sequence. So, but I take a lot of notes just brainstorming.
Yeah, see, I wonder if we are as far back, because I have notes, but I don't think of them as an outline. Like, I have little scraps of paper, like the receipt from the restaurant I went to, and I'll write, and they're in like a rough order, but I would just never think of it as an outline. It's like a mishmash.
Yeah. If my outlines, if you read them, you probably wouldn't be like, oh, here is an outline.
Yeah.
Because it's like, it ends up being somewhere around 12 pages of notes. And if you start reading at the beginning, you won't recognize the character by the end. Because I'm like, oh, this person is this age and they do this job. And by the end, they have another name and another job and a different life situation.
But it's really interesting to think about that, and the fact that, you write in a way that works for you. And the fact that, even people who are plotters, everyone plots differently. So I think that's really interesting. So we do have a couple of reader questions. So Pam would like to know, can you both talk about the editing process? How do your books change as you get feedback from your agents and your editors?
I've never done this with anyone from my publisher on the call or on the show or the event. This would be very funny. Kirsten, you decide if you want to take this back to Shana or not. But when I am writing, first of all, it took me a very long time to get published. It took 11 years. And my debut novel was the 8th one I wrote. So I have a lot of novels. My 5th novel just came out, but even besides. Every time I write a novel, and it is as true for the one I'm writing now as any of the ones that came before, even though I'm going to tell you this, it is still true, and I hope will be true forever. I labor under this perseverative delusion that I am writing the world's first perfect first draft. And as I write each scene, they finish, I read over my golden jewels of words, and I'm like, oh my God, this time nobody is going to want me to change a thing. I'm going to hand it over to my editor, Shana at Sourcebooks, and she's going to be like, Jenny, we're not even going to put a cover on this book. It's so perfect, it doesn't even need a cover. And I really always believe it. I mean, really, I'm talking to you. It's like, I'm talking to you about it, but I still believe it. But then I give it to like my trusty readers and then Shana, and all of a sudden I have this massive fall from grace. And I'm like, it did not just need a comma change. It needed, I mean, I think I said it, like some of my books have gone through 22 drafts. So the editing process for me, this is a long way of answering your question, is sheer heck, since some kids might be listening. It's really hard because I thought I was writing this, and then I'm like, this needs to, and my editor is always right. Everybody is always right. They're completely brilliant. If I had them when I was writing it, well, I probably would not be as joyful as I usually am when I'm writing, but I would see all this stuff. But it takes me all these iterations. And then I get to editing and, you know, I acknowledge everybody's brilliance. And I thank goodness they didn't publish the book without a cover. And then I'm done.
Yeah, I think that like delusion is protective, right? It's so protective because I have this like soaring, it's almost like this hypomanic kind of excitement about when I first start a book that will carry me through like at least the first third before I lose my nerve and start questioning everything. So for me, like the writing, like usually I am just high for the first, you know, third, even up to the first half of the book before I'm like, oh no, everything's gonna fall apart and I hope I can just land this plane. So that's how it feels to write. And then by the time I'm ready to edit, I usually like, I understand it's going to need something, but like you, Jenny, I can't really imagine what it would be. And so this always happens. And again, I agree. My editors always make my book better, always. They listen to me, they respect me when I whine a little bit and they pat me on the head and then they help push me and then push me again. And that's a really wonderful process. Like you get this letter. When I get my first ed letter though, my first reaction is I read it and I am like, she doesn't get it. I don't know why she doesn't get it, but she doesn't get it. And I have to kind of put it aside. And then I reread it and I'm like, I think she gets it.
Like that for me too with the editor letter, but my husband is my very, very first reader. And so I don't have to be polite to him like I would to Shayna. So I can be like, you don't get it.
Yeah, my husband gets some of that as well. He's like, I have to wait until I am in like the right attentive space to read your pages because this is really a lot of pressure. And I'm like, I just need your first take. And basically what I'm saying is, I just need you to tell me how great this is. That's all I want.
Completely understand. Completely.
Moderately compliant in that regard.
We should let them go out for drinks together, SF. They can commiserate.
It's not easy always.
But look at the end product. It's great.
Well, my husband was really, I consulted him a lot for The Quiet Girl because Alex, the main character, or one of the main characters in The Quiet Girl, is in the biotech industry, and so is my spouse. And so I leaned on him a lot for that part, and I think he felt really involved. And that got him to read the pages faster because he was more into it.
Too funny. Another reader question. Do you write the chapters in order? I'm writing separate sections, and now I have the challenge of putting them into order.
That's a great question.
Definitely.
Jenny, do you want to go or do you?
So the question person, you're a writer as well, and you're writing kind of out of sequence. I would say that I admire that so much. I write completely linearly, and it's tied to the whole, like it's perfect because it's not perfect like I'm thinking I am such a brilliant writer. It's more like I believe that I'm watching the novel unfold like a movie. And so exactly what SF said, like I can't envision anything being different until our brilliant editors step in, is because to me it seems like I just watched it and I'm like, well, of course it has to go this way. It's not like I make this stuff up and then somebody will be like, no, you do make this stuff up, you know. So to the person who's writing out a sequence, that just sounds like a very fascinating process to me. And what I would say is every writer is different. Like if anybody tells you that can't work, of course it can. Like your journey is to find the way that works for you. And yeah, it might be challenging to put them in order and sequence them right, but at least you don't have to believe that you wrote a perfect book that you learn is not perfect.
I write a lot of books that have like dual point of view dual points of view. And at times I will write a couple chapters in one voice and then go back. Also a lot of like past present stuff. Like, so sometimes I will write like a string of chapters that are meant to be interspersed. I've definitely done that. With one of my first books, I wrote the end, and then I wrote the rest of it because I was so excited about that part, and I was just learning how to write and like figuring out how to do it. And so I needed to write something that was exciting to me. I will say that when I write anything out of sequence, I mean, obviously there's a process of like going through and like stitching it all together, but there's absolutely nothing wrong with writing what interests you, what you're passionate about, what voice you're hearing in your head, you know, and you really want to write about. I think that that absolutely works, or can work depending on who you are and what you're, you know, like sort of what you're interested in at that time. But I think it's important to write the thing you're passionate about when you can. Like for me, that comes and goes. And so I have to grab the opportunity if I'm excited about an idea or a scene or something. Sometimes you just got to write it.
So did your ending, as of when you wrote that ending first, did that stay the same even in the finished version of the book?
Well, that did, but that book was never published. So
Yeah.
that was the very first book I ever wrote. And like I said, I was feeling my way. And, you know, I still think about those characters sometimes.
Well, maybe you'll get back to it.
I don't know. I've cannibalized a lot of those ideas, though.
Yeah.
That's what I do.
Yeah.
Great. And what would you say are some of the keys to building suspense? Another great question.
Yeah, that's such a great one. I've given a workshop actually on this for Sisters in Crime, and there's always a point when I give the workshop that I get this like panicked feeling as if I were on the edge of a cliff. And it's because I think I realize I don't know how the heck to build. I don't know how I do it. Like suspense is what people talk about in my books. Like if there's one universal factor, I think that's what people seem to feel that I do. It probably has to do with not knowing what's going to happen. I usually surprise myself. Oh, and I know one other thing. I think I live in a very scared place in my head a lot. Like a lot of my books come to me because it's sort of like I'm in the regular situation, whatever it is. It could be standing on a subway platform or on a supermarket line. And then my mind goes like, well, what would happen if you just turned the knob and everything changed and went horribly wrong? And that kind of living with fear, while maybe is not so good in some ways, I think does impart the kind of suspense that people look for in my books, maybe.
I'm new to this in terms of suspense. I've written a lot of action. I've written, you know, like a lot of romance. I haven't written a lot of suspense, and I felt kind of so new to it. I wish I had been able to attend your workshop because for me, I think a lot about pacing. And wanting to keep everything moving. But as I write, one thing I do in my first drafts is I lay down a lot of little breadcrumbs for myself, some of which I never pick up again and they end up getting swept out with revisions. But I start laying down things that I think are intriguing as I write the chapters, like a little detail or something that I think maybe I'll come back to. And oftentimes it ends up fitting. I don't know whether this is like my unconscious processing. You know, I can't quite hold all of those things in my conscious, you know, processor at once. But underground, you know, we all have these vast unconscious sort of wells of stuff going on. And so I think sometimes when I am laying down like little breadcrumbs that, you know, attentive readers will pick up because in the finished draft, they'll all be connected and there'll be a reason they're there. But I think that the reason those work is that somehow I'm intentionally laying down things that I just maybe don't even realize I'm going to need yet. But it's amazing how many times I'll be like, oh, I laid down that clue, so I'll just run with that. So, you know, I think that helps because it's amazing to me, like readers of this genre are so clever and like, I'm talking to you guys who are so astute and, you know, realize very quickly, oh, this is a clue, or like you have to be really clever. Sometimes I'm just worried everything's going to be way too obvious, because for readers in this genre, they've seen all the twists, you know, they're so like on top of it that they can see things coming. So it's a real challenge to like, you know, juke your readers in a way that still feels not artificial or unfair, unearned.
Yeah. Authenticity, I think, is huge. I guess I would add this one thing. I love the idea of breadcrumbs, but I would add this one thing for the participant who's a writer, which is look at your chapter endings. Very often, like if you can slice off the last line, 2 lines, paragraph of what you think is your chapter ending, you'll have a banging chapter ending right above it. So just look, make sure your chapter endings, you know, fall like a domino tile to the next, but also look for if there's like flab at the end of a chapter, because I notice myself as a writer, I do that a lot.
100% endorse that one. Suzanne Collins, who wrote The Hunger Games, like not just, I read those books in a week, all 3 of them, like a textbook, because she, every single chapter, you're like, I have to turn the page. And I was a new writer myself at the time, and that's how I learned how to, the chapter endings, absolutely, like you can usually slice off, like you called it, that flab. That's absolutely true. And like you want an ending that just, you know.
The other book I would recommend, since we're talking about this, like a la The Hunger Games, I hesitate in a way to recommend this. The book is fantastic, so I'm just going to say that. Like the book Hunting Down Amanda by Andrew Klavan is one of the best novels you could read, to see like every chapter you come to, you're like, they'll never get out of this. He's going to have to end the book 100 pages, and then he manages to do it. So with some reservations for another reason that I won't go into, but I do recommend that book if you're writing a suspense novel. And then of course I recommend S.F.
Great. What are some of the writing resources that have been most helpful to you guys as you've gone through the journey of writing your books?
I highly recommend international thriller writers joining. As soon as you have a contract from a publisher that is on their list, you can join for free. It's worth it even if you're joining as a paid member. Sisters in Crime also highly recommend. If you are just beginning the writing journey, they have a group called the Guppies, stands for like the Great Unpublished. Tons of support and resources there. And I also recommend certain books that I think are fantastic, like Albert Zuckerman's Writing the Blockbuster Novel, and Donald Moss's The Breakout Novel series, and Elizabeth Lyon's The Sell Your Novel Toolkit. Those are all my like jewels in a crown of building a writing career.
I should be taking notes.
Don't worry, this is recording.
So when I was just getting started, I really gleaned a lot, because I was clueless. I wrote my first book and then I was like, oh my goodness, I'm the only person to have ever done this. And, like I thought, like nobody ever does this, and then I realized and educated myself, and 30,000 people a year I think query agents. So I used the Absolute Right forums. They are well moderated, and there are a lot of really experienced writers, and you can get some feedback, and you can offer feedback and get support and information. So that's those are definitely boards that I relied on heavily. And then in terms of a book, those the books that you mentioned, Jenny, I have on my shelf. They're all really good, but I also really like Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. And you can even, if you Google it, there are some writers, and I wish I could think of their names, but who have come up with beat sheets. So it's really about like the structure of your novel, and it comes from a screenwriting perspective, and like sort of breaks down plots into all of these beats. And it's unbelievable. Once you read it, you will not watch movies the same way again, because I can even tell where I am in a movie by what is happening. I'm like, oh, this is the break into the second act. This is that's where I got the Dark Night of the Soul.
Oh yeah.
you know, and you're like launch into the third act. So I think that that book really helps you if you're looking to supplement like the quality of writing, which is obviously crucial, with some stuff about your structure and your pacing. And there are all sorts of resources related to that online. You can enter your word count and see like approximately the range of pages where these beats should be happening. Like, you know, it's actually pretty helpful to analyze your own plot structure for that. So
Definitely. And then Jenny, Pam says that she loves the dog Depot, which we know many of the readers do. So was there always a dog in the novel? And tell me more about the dog's role, what it added, and what you were thinking as you wrote.
So I forget who it was at Sourcebooks who said, like, my book should come with a sticker that says no pets or children harmed in the making of a Jenny Milchman novel. But that is a pledge that I keep to for myself as a writer and for all my readers. So apparently a lot of people were worried about Depot. Depot's a hero in the book. He was there from the original inception. I knew that Julie, I didn't know that she was going to struggle with alcohol, but I knew she had a rescue dog, and I knew he was going to be, you know, big and really a presence in the book. I've published 5 novels, and 3 of them now have dogs in them. So I really like writing dogs. And in fact, in my 3rd novel, the dog was originally a point of view character, although that turned out to be one of the not perfect parts of the novel, and so we changed it. Apparently it's only Stephen King who can pull that off.
maybe
But,
someday.
yeah. You know, Depot, I don't know, I see him, to me, he has a very identifiable look, and he's what got Julie through. And I think that's true for, you know, I think that's authentic to a lot of people, not myself, but I sort of dream of being that kind of dog owner. You know, when I talk to writers and I say, Louise Penny said that one of the most important things a writer can have is a partner. And when I talk, and, you know, a supportive partner. And some writers have that, but not every writer does. But when I'm talking to emerging writers, I say that role can be inhabited by a friend, it can be inhabited by a cousin, it could be inhabited by a pet. But we need somebody whose eyes sort of, when we look at them, make us feel like we are the person we want to be. And I think that's what Depot does for Julie.
You're muted.
I'm muted?
And I'm still muted. I had just muted myself for a minute. So why mystery? Why mystery? Why thriller? SF, you want to kick it off?
Sure. Well, like I mentioned, I've written in a lot of other genres before, fantasy and sci-fi, and sort of urban fantasy. But I also mentioned I'm a psychologist, and I think that I really looked on writing in the real world as an intimidating challenge, but one that I found pretty exciting. So I found that just the challenge of it to be really energizing. It's very different than writing fantasy where you're just inventing a whole world and a system of magic, and you know that's a different kind of challenge. But this has been something I love, and I've read. I have always loved reading like thrillers and psychological suspense, and so, and you know, sort of anything with a mystery. And I think that I've read these books and sort of absorbed. You know, I often read. I read as a reader, but I also read as a writer, and get pretty excited about some of the sort of structuring and the twists. And I, you know, you sort of wonder, well, could I do that? So I gave it a try.
Okay, so for me, I always wanted to be a writer. And when I was a sophomore in college, my parents had the talk with me. It's not the talk you're thinking, because I was already a sophomore. It's the talk that goes, what are you going to do with this very expensive degree? And that was fine, because I had a plan. My plan was to be a poet and live in the woods in a log cabin of my own making. I was a sophomore in college, give me a break. My parents pointed out that I had never actually wielded a hammer. So this is going to sound weird, like introducing it like too late in a date, but I went to graduate school and I became ABD in psychology. I never got to the accomplished place at which SF is, but that was because I lamed out at the dissertation level. But I did practice as a psychotherapist, specializing in treating children. This is weird, why it's weird to like bring it up now. You're like, are you copying my resume? And I was working at a rural community mental health center when I got this very scary case. Runs counter to the pledge I made you all about pets in my books. I was assigned this case where a mother brought in her tiny little 5-year-old daughter to see me, and the little girl had just killed the family pet. And it was almost as if life was a suspense novel. You know, I had to figure out how to make sure this little girl's behaviors didn't escalate, what was causing them, what was going on. So I sat down and I wrote my first crime fiction book, and it occurred to me that, you know, if you want to be a writer, you write the kinds of books that you curl up with at night. And as FS said, for me, that was crime fiction, that was suspense, that was psychological thrillers. So, you know, that was my first novel. It was about a young psychologist in training who had this very scary case, never got published. But, you know, I was hooked. I was hooked on the genre, and all the books, unpublished and published, have actually sat in that same kind of spot where, you know, a couple of different genres feed into it, but it's always like a very psychological question, not a whodunit, but a why done.
That's a great way to put that.
Definitely. And it makes for intriguing reads because, again, it's why. Do you set a word count each day when you're writing?
I have, if I have a deadline and I know like, okay, like I need to write 5,000 words today. But
That's a lot.
I do that sometimes. And I've written up to like 8,000 words in a day when I'm really, really into it. I think that is harder for me with psychological thrillers because I have to be so much more meticulous in terms of, like, I find that easier when I'm writing romance, and I can just get swept up in those relational aspects of it that are really enjoyable. But with the thriller, because the plot is so intricate, I find that I can't write them quite as fast as I can write other genres that I've written. So I don't really set a word count. A good day for me will be 3,000 to 5,000 words, but obviously I can't do that every day. Like, I'll do that once or twice a week and then have much smaller days. And so it sort of depends on what phase I'm in too.
Okay.
Sometimes it's like you're on a roller coaster and you finally get over that and you're just headed down to the climax, and then I can just bang it out because I'm excited.
Nice. Another reader question. Pam says, thanks so much to both of you and your publisher for providing great books to escape into during this COVID time. How has COVID affected you and your writing? Are you having trouble with isolation?
I think the writing part is usually pretty isolated anyway. I mean, I know some writers really like to go to a Starbucks, or I always write in an isolated way. Like, you know, before I moved to my new house, I used to write in a closet, and as long as it had a door that closed. And now I write in a converted shed. I mean, I'm very isolated, even to the extent that I have, you know, I could be less so about it. But I do think that COVID has affected every single one of us. And it certainly affected like the business part of writing. You know, Kirsten and I were on a call. Gosh, I mean, it must have been only, I don't know, 4 months ago that we finally, not even, maybe 3 months ago, we were like, well, the tour is going to be, you know, via Zoom and online as opposed to in person. So it's affected that part of my career hugely. I used to go out on what was known as the world's longest book tour, not just by me. And Sourcebook sent me on a 9-week tour, you know, when my 4th novel came out. So it's changed that in a huge way.
Yeah, it's definitely impacted the events, but I think what's awesome is, again, all 3 of us are here together today having this event, and all 3 of us are in different locations.
Yeah.
SF,
for sure.
Yeah. SF, what about you?
Well, like Jenny said, I think COVID has affected all of us in terms of like that feeling of just being more separated. I have a really busy household, and so I think I've been more focused on just distractions, like getting my 4 kids to like be able to have schooling in a way that works for them. Like it's that kind of challenge. But again, I think we're very fortunate. Like I work from home. I'm deeply introverted and like to be by myself. I'm also a writer who doesn't go to a Starbucks, and I know some really phenomenally productive writers who do. So I think that this would have affected them even more. It hasn't affected me so much in terms of my routine. Emotionally, of course, it's deeply distressing and distracting. So I think like a lot of people, there have certainly been times where I've struggled to be productive because it's, I think distraction is just the best word. There's just a lot going on, and it's, some days I just find that I'm in this sort of fog of just can't quite settle into that ecstatic, creative space that, it's a little harder to do that these days.
Yeah, completely understand on that front. All right, so we're gonna start to wrap up the event, and we're going to go through some rapid fire questions. So what is your current read? SF, you want to start us off?
Sure. The last book I finished was Culture Warlords by Talia Lavin, which is excellent, and I recommend it. It's nonfiction, but I read a lot of nonfiction for inspiration. My current read is this lovely thing. I have not too far into it, but I am already riveted.
Thank you. SF's book is also my next read. It's my next read, but that's because I'm very linear in reading too, and I have to finish this first because I started it first. It's by Ruth Ware. It's called The Death of Mrs. Westaway. So these two.
Fabulous.
Oh, I love Ruth Ware.
Favorite mystery author? Jenny?
I can't do that. I just can't, but I'm gonna say biggest inspiration in like the blend of genres that I love, and it's Stephen King.
Okay.
For me, Gillian Flynn is just, her writing is vicious, and I mean that in the best of ways, like so sharp and evocative that just about everything she writes is terrifying.
She is vicious. That's a really good word for it. And I still worry about that kid at the end of Gone Girl. I think he's 8 now.
Oh, goodness. A favorite mystery novel? SF?
So I'll just go with my Gillian Flynn theme and say Sharp Objects. Although Dark Places, which was her second book, is also, those are like the pre-Gone Girl novels, and they are both phenomenal and terrifying.
I love Leanne Moriarty. So truly madly guilty. Is that it? The one about the barbecue, the backyard barbecue. And then I'll also recommend somebody who hasn't broken out to that extent, Zoran Zailkas. Koren Zailkas, Koren. I'm spelling it because people should really look her up. Mother, and The Drama Teacher are brilliant books.
Fantastic. Do you have a favorite podcast? Jenny?
I have audio issues, so I do not listen to any podcasts at all.
Completely understand.
I listen to the NPR Politics podcast a lot.
Gosh.
No more comment on that.
Ruling.
Good thing this is rapid fire. So a favorite movie, SF?
You know what? I gotta go with the old classics. There are two. I would say Labyrinth and Lady Hawk. Both like movies of my youth that I still adore.
Nice.
3 based on books that are favorite books as well. So it's Misery by Stephen King, Stand By Me, which is based on The Body by Stephen King, and A Simple Plan by Scott Smith. But the movie versions are all equally brilliant as the books, I think, which is a lot to pull off. Yay, Rob Reiner. I'm out of retirement. Make my movie.
A favorite TV series?
So
Jenny?
lately, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. I
was going to say lately, I don't recommend this for everybody because it's actually pretty brutal, but The Boys which is on Amazon, is just in terms of the psychology of the characters, it's really good, but it is very violent. So if you're sensitive to that, I would give it a pass, but it's pretty riveting.
Is that the superhero one, SF?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love like upside down tropes. I just love it when they take it and they just like tilt it sideways.
Well, I'll do the antithesis of boys or the boys, which is Great British Bake Off, but then I'll also say Ozark. But Great British Bake Off, come on, we all need some cookie love in these times.
Oh, absolutely.
I watch that with my kids. That's our show.
I know, it is really like the UK just has got it going on.
We watch Chopped on Hulu, and it's fabulous. Favorite writing snack?
Tea and muffins, tea and muffins. They should be all over the internet with this release because a couple of people have showcased my muffin recipe. Tea and muffins. It's very Angela Fletcher of me. Not Angela. Jessica Fletcher, sorry.
I drink a lot of tea, but I never eat when I write, so I can't really. I get asked that question a lot, but I can't, like, my hands are busy.
This is true. This is true. As they should be. Another reader question, do you have a guilty pleasure that you're willing to share?
Dessert. No, I'm so like Pollyanna. I would share anything, basically. It's dessert. I just eat a lot of dessert.
I don't know if I have a guilty pleasure. I play a ridiculous amount of this game called Wordscapes, which is like my way to, it's almost embarrassing how much time I spend playing it. But it is like this cleansing, it's just this way of when I'm doing it, I can't really be thinking about everything. So I use it as a way of almost like cleansing my mental palette. But it's almost mindless. So I guess that would be it. It's kind of boring. But.
Great. All right. And two last questions. Since Halloween is in a week, what is your favorite Halloween candy?
Butterfinger.
Good choice. Another good choice. I just love candy, so I'll take it all. And last question, your all-time favorite Halloween costume?
That we dressed up in, or that anybody has dressed up in?
Any.
Oh, good.
I was going to do that I had dressed up in because I can't think of like other people, although there's probably some amazing costumes. But when I was like 8 and my brother was 5, my mom made us trees and she cut like leaves out of oak tag, fall colored leaves, and like, I don't know, hot glued or sewed or something. We were just cut. It was the coolest costume ever. Like, and when you become a mom, you're like, how did my mom pull that off? Like 2 little ones and she's like sewing leaves, cut out leaves made of oak tag. Is really cool.
Yeah, my mom made us Crayola crowns one year, and that was, but I can't do anything like that. So my favorite was last year, one of my kids dressed up as an alien, dressed up as a human. And it was just this very subtle, like, you know, they had like antenna, but it was under the hood. And they had, you know, a little flash of green. And then when they would pull their hands out of their pockets, they were like monster hands. And they had a shirt that said human on it.
I love it.
People themselves a human. That was their 11-year-old costume. So
That's smart.
Oh, that's great.
they came up with it on their own.
That's very cool.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you both so much for joining us. It's been a wonderful lunch hour, getting to know you guys and your writing style a little more. Any last comments before we sign off?
Thank you, Source Books. Thank you, Bookmarked, for book clubs. It's just such an awesome series. Thanks, Kirsten, and it's been great meeting you, SF.
Yeah, likewise. And thanks to everybody who came out to watch and see us doing our antics. Thank you, Kirsten, for hosting us.
Of course, of course. This has been a great time, and we will talk with you guys later. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the day.